The legend of Nathaniel Stone preceded him like a dust devil on the plains. They said he'd killed a man in Laramie with his bare hands. They said he'd burned down an entire homestead rather than let it fall to claim jumpers. They said his ranch, the Obsidian, was built on bones and watered with blood. Children were cautioned to stay clear of the North Ridge where his property began, and mothers crossed themselves when his name was mentioned in town. What they didn't say was that he was lonely enough to weep. Nathaniel stood on the porch of his ranch house at dawn, watching the sun bleed orange across the landscape. He was 53 years old, weathered as saddle leather, with scars on his knuckles that told stories nobody wanted to hear. The ranch sprawled across 10,000 acres of some of the most brutal country in Colorado, rocky, unforgiving, beautiful only if you had the kind of heart that could appreciate wilderness without needing mercy. His horse, Reaper, stood tied to the post beside him. They were preparing for a ride out to the north pasture, where a wolf had been spotted near the cattle. It was a kind of solitary work that had defined Nathaniel's life for the past 20 years, ever since his wife had died of fever, and his daughter had taken her inheritance to San Francisco, promising to visit, never returning. He was about to mount when he heard it, a sound like an animal in distress. It came from the ravine west of the house, a whimper that might have been a coyote or a wounded deer. Nathaniel had no patience for sentimentality, but he found his boots moving toward the sound anyway. He descended the rocky slope with the careful grace of a large man who'd learned to move quietly, and what he found stopped him cold. A girl, no more than 16, huddled beneath an overhang, shivering in a dress that had been fashionable perhaps 5 years ago. She was skeletal, her skin stretched tight over bones, her hair matted and filthy. One foot was wrapped in what appeared to be a burlap sack tied with twine. When she saw him, she scrambled backward, terror flooding her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "I wasn't stealing. I was just cold. I'll leave. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Nathaniel said nothing. He simply studied her, the way her ribs showed through her dress, the fever bright in her eyes, the desperation that came off her like heat shimmer. She was a waif, a burden, exactly the kind of complication a man in his position didn't need. "What's your name?" His voice came out rough from disuse. "Lily," she said. "Lily Brennan. From Denver. My father died, and my mother, she couldn't afford to keep me. I've been on the road for 3 months. 3 months. In these mountains, in late autumn, with winter approaching like a predator." "You're half dead," Nathaniel said flatly. "Yes, sir," Lily agreed, and something about her acceptance of her own worthlessness infuriated him in a way he couldn't name. He made a decision that violated every instinct of self-preservation he'd cultivated over 5 decades. "Come on." Lily didn't move. "Sir, you heard me. Up." He extended a hand and watched her stare at it as if it might transform into something dangerous. Perhaps it would. His hands had done terrible things. But they could also, apparently, offer help to homeless girls in ravines. She took his hand. Her fingers were like bird bones, brittle and cold, and he pulled her up. She swayed, and he caught her before she fell, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, as if she were already halfway to becoming a ghost. "Don't be afraid," he said, which was absurd. She should be afraid. Everyone was afraid of Nathaniel Stone. But the words came anyway, a promise he barely understood making. The kitchen of the Obsidian Ranch was rarely used. Nathaniel's meals were simple: coffee, sometimes bread, meat when the hunting was good. But he had supplies, stores laden for winter, a larder that reflected both paranoia and foresight. He settled Lily at the kitchen table and began to work. Beef broth simmering, fresh bread from a loaf baked 2 days prior, butter, honey, a chicken he'd been saving for reasons he couldn't articulate. Within an hour, the kitchen smelled like comfort, like the kind of abundance that seemed obscene given how little Lily had clearly eaten in months. She watched him cook with eyes that couldn't seem to focus, her body trembling with cold and illness. "Eat slowly," he commanded, setting a bowl before her. The broth was steaming, fragrant with herbs. "Your stomach's been empty too long. You'll make yourself sick if you rush." Lily lifted the spoon with both hands. She was shaking that badly, and took a small sip, her eyes closed. When she opened them, Tears were streaming down her face. "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. "I was ready to die." Nathaniel turned away, unable to bear the weight of her gratitude. He busied himself with the bread, slicing it thick, spreading butter and honey across the surface. The intimacy of feeding someone, really feeding them, with care and intention, was more dangerous than any gunfight he'd ever engaged in. "Your father," he said, to distract himself. What was he? Between spoonfuls, Lily told him. A teacher, a gentleman who'd loved books and philosophy. He contracted pneumonia the previous winter, and her mother, left with Lily and no resources, had made a choice that poverty forces on women. She'd sold what she could, including her daughter's future, to survive. "My mother isn't a bad woman," Lily said, and there was something in her voice that broke Nathaniel's heart. This fierce protection of someone who'd abandoned her. She was desperate. "Desperation doesn't excuse abandonment," Nathaniel said, but his voice was quiet. "Neither does it condemn it," Lily replied, and Nathaniel realized he was speaking to someone far older than 16, someone whose childhood had been burned away by necessity. Lily stayed. It wasn't a conscious decision that Nathaniel made, but rather a series of small choices that accumulated into transformation. He gave her a room. He fed her 3 times a day, watching as she slowly gained weight, as the fever in her eyes cooled to something more human. He brought her books from a chest in the attic, his wife's books, unread for 2 decades, and found her in the library, devouring them with the hunger of someone starving for knowledge. Winter came hard and early that year. Snow piled against the windows, and the wind howled across the plains like something alive and furious. Nathaniel found himself staying in the house more, sitting by the fire while Lily read aloud. Poetry, novels, passages of philosophy that her father must have loved. "How is it," she asked one evening, her voice hesitant, "that a man like you lives like this, alone? What kind of man is that?" Nathaniel asked, though he knew. "The kind the town is afraid of," Lily said. "The kind the stories say is dangerous." "Am I dangerous to you?" he asked. "No," Lily said, and there was certainty in her voice. "You saved my life. You gave me shelter. You—" She paused, struggling for words. "You treated me like I mattered, like my life was worth something. No one had done that since my father died." Nathaniel rose and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. The legendary Nathaniel Stone, the most feared rancher in Colorado. And what was he afraid of? He was afraid of being alone. He was afraid of reaching the end of his life and discovering that all the fear he'd inspired in others had been purchased with the price of his own isolation. "Come here," he said. Lily came and stood beside him, their reflections ghostly in the dark window. "Your father," Nathaniel said slowly, "would want you to live, really live, not just survive, but build something. Use that brilliant mind of yours. Become someone." He turned to face her. "Stay here through the winter. I'll teach you to manage the books, to understand the business of ranching. And in the spring, if you want to leave, to go to school, to make your own way, I'll help you. But stay now. The world is too brutal in winter for dreams." "And you?" Lily asked. "What will you do?" Nathaniel smiled, an expression so rare that it transformed his face entirely. "I'll learn," he said, "that legends can change, that the most feared man on the frontier can also be the one who offers shelter, that there's a difference between isolation and solitude, and I've been living the wrong one." Spring came to the Obsidian Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. Lily stood in the garden that Nathaniel had helped her plant, rows of vegetables, herbs, the beginnings of something beautiful. She'd grown an inch taller over the winter, and there was color in her cheeks, intelligence and purpose burning in her eyes. She wore a dress of simple blue calico that Nathaniel had bought for her in town, and for the first time in her life, she looked like a girl who believed in tomorrow. The town gossip had transformed entirely. The fear Nathaniel Stone had taken in a homeless girl and given her shelter. Some said it proved he wasn't so terrible after all. Others said it was suspicious, that surely something improper was occurring. But Nathaniel didn't care. He'd spent 20 years earning a reputation as a man to fear, and he'd learned something far more valuable. The reputation didn't matter. What mattered was the life you built, the people you chose to help, the love you were brave enough to offer. I've been accepted to a school in Boulder, Lily said, handing him a letter. They have a program for young women. I could study literature, teaching. My father always believed education was the greatest inheritance. Of course you've been accepted, Nathaniel said, reading the words without absorbing them. You're brilliant. Will you be all right? Lily asked. Alone again? Nathaniel looked at this girl, this woman, who had arrived broken and had been stitched back together by nothing more than shelter, food, and the simple acknowledgement that her life had value. And he understood that loneliness wasn't something you fixed by having other people around. It was something you fixed by becoming someone worth being around. I won't be alone, he said. You'll visit, and I'll stop hiding from this town. Maybe I'll help Mrs. Patterson teach at the school. Maybe I'll sponsor other children who need shelter. He touched her face gently. You changed me, Lily Brennan. One meal changed everything. She kissed his cheek, a daughter's kiss, an expression of gratitude and love that needed nothing more complicated than itself. As he watched her ride toward her new future, Nathaniel Stone, the most feared rancher in Colorado, discovered something the legends had never mentioned, that a man could spend his whole life building walls, only to discover that the greatest strength was in opening the door,